Hello, everybody, and welcome to Aric Talks, the show where I talk about things that are important to me. And welcome to another episode of Aric Talks way too late in the freaking evening. I'm recording actually from my childhood bedroom. You can kind of see the old childhood stuffed animals there behind me. There's a reason that I wanted to record this evening. It's like 2:15 in the night, and I just simply have not been able to fall asleep. And I think that the reason for my wanting to record this will become apparent. But first, I'm gonna tell a little bit of a seemingly unrelated story, and then hopefully it will become clear why I'm telling it. I had I went to a Bible college, recent graduate, heck yeah, and I went to a Bible college, and one of the things that we would do is we would have theologians on campus or some influential Christian figure, and there would often be opportunities to like sit with them and like discuss interesting, difficult things. And there was this one time that there was this one theology person that I kind of disagreed with, but I was very interested by, who came on campus, and I kind of decided to myself, I'm going to go talk to this guy. And we were getting into the weeds on this really interesting little, very obscure piece of theology. Very odd conversation, but very enjoyable conversation. And halfway through, he just switch gears on me and asked me if I had decolonized my bookshelf. Um, and I was a little confused by that, and I asked him to explain himself, and he asked me basically in this very smug way if I had gone through and took stock of how many white male straight authors I had on my bookshelf. Okay, fair enough. I had never done that before. And I asked him if he had done that before, and he said yes, absolutely, and just like rattled off the number. He had like the exact quotas of uh, of what races were on his bookshelf. It was a very odd conversation, but I decided to indulge him because apparently this is a thing that some intelligent people do. And so I went home, having never thought or considered this ever before in my life, and I found, much to my surprise, that my bookshelf was actually more racially diverse than his bookshelf was. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? And I wondered why that was, because this was a person who very obviously cared about having himself be influenced by diverse and interesting people. And particularly in terms of the traditional categories of race, gender, sexual orientation, that sort of thing. He wanted to be influenced by them. And yet his bookshelf wasn't as diverse as my bookshelf, which I never gave a single thought to the identities of the authors I was choosing ever in my life. And I began to consider this question even deeper when I started to think about my own educational experience. And my department on campus, which was the political science department, was the most diverse department on campus, at least as far as I knew. And I also knew for a fact that affirmative action, or kind of racially motivated selection of candidates for our program, was never, ever, ever a factor in the selection. And yet still we had far and above the most diverse group of students on campus. Words are coming to me slowly today. There was another issue at my college that I took some interest in, which was that we had a very large minority population from another country. They weren't born in the United States, and most of them intended to return to their country after having training. And most of them were being paid by their country to come to America and be educated here, and then come back and bring that knowledge back to their home country. And these students were always the subject of quite a bit of ridicule and quite a bit of dismissal by a lot of students, actually. And there's kind of two types of racism that people like that can be exposed to. And the first is this kind of right-wing casual racism, which is this kind of chauvinistic, joking, just casual racism, basically. But then you have this kind of left-wing racism, which is very motivated by this like very thought-out theory. And the basic argument was that because these students weren't from America, they never really experienced real racism, and therefore they didn't really count. And that was kind of the theory that was presented by a very small group of students at my university. And that really pissed off other students, particularly students of color, who just felt like that was an incredibly dismissive and vile thing to say about our guests, basically. And luckily I had the opportunity to mentor one of the people who felt irate about that, and now they have a position in student government and are able to speak into the lives of these very complicated, difficult racial questions that universities have to contend with and consider. Why am I saying this? Why am I talking to you about the racial politics of an obscure Bible college that I went to? Well, the other day in Minnesota, a black man was kneeled on, knee to throat, until his soul was no longer in his body by a police officer. And I'm not going to share the video here, because even the most emotionally mature and emotionally stable people would probably have a difficult time, I know I'd have, watching a human soul leave a human body. And it has left me very wrecked. So I'm not going to share it here because I don't feel like subjecting you to that. But needless to say, the footage made it so that the officers were very rightly fired, and I am sure lawsuits are coming against them very soon. But it's still this significant racial injustice, and the community there is rioting, not even protesting. They are protesting, but like proper rioting, which is hard to judge in a certain way because you have this much pent up community anger, and it just needs to be expressed, and that can be very destructive in a number of ways. I don't have any moral commentary for how people are responding to that, but what I am trying to get at by kind of talking about this diversity is when I encounter things that are painful and difficult and evil, because let's call it what it is. It's a thing of evil. I want to do something about it. And the problem with these kind of really big issues, there's like 5 really big issues that I'm being obsessed with right now. And the COVID virus is a big issue. China's increasing encroachment on human rights in Hong Kong is a big issue. The rioting going on is a big issue. All of this stuff is huge, massive, complicated issues. And sure, I am studying to get a law degree and I'm hoping to go to law school soon. And so I can say like, oh, hypothetically in 10 to 30 years when I'm in politics, I can do something. But like it's not good for a human brain to have so many abstract problems that they don't know what to do about. I mean, it's utterly and completely destructive to a human mind to just be confronted with all these problems and just not know what to do with them. After donating a small amount of money, whatever small amount of money a recent college graduate without a job can during a global pandemic can donate, I've donated to an organization that I think is doing good and helping. What do you do past that? And I've been confronted with all these like articles that are like, BuzzFeed-esque, like 10 things white people can do. And and it's just, they're all ridiculous because they all make this weird assumption that white people are rich, that the person reading it is a white person who is rich, and that everyone that who's black is like poor. And so it's all like, oh, invest in these type of businesses. And I'm just thinking here, like, I don't have any money to invest. I don't know what you're talking about. So the human mind is in a position where it needs to have something that can be properly confronted with and do. And so I began considering, again, my bookshelf. I began considering my bookshelf, and I began considering my academic department, both of which had, like these places that I saw real racial harmony. And a bookshelf is an interesting thing, right? Because basically what you're doing is you're curating horcruxes, right? Like in Harry Potter, you have this spell where you remove a portion of your soul and put it into an object. That's basically what you're doing when you're writing a book. And so when one cultivates a bookshelf, one is cultivating a collection of souls. And so I consider the bookshelf litmus test to be a pretty powerful and important one. Not that I think you should take it so seriously that you categorize and note the race of every author you ever interact with. That's basically what we as humans are trying to do, and we associate with each other, right? Is we're trying to collect beautiful souls that can make us better. That's what every level of human interaction is basically trying to do it, whether it's a friend group or a family or a city or a state or a nation or a world. You're trying to collect and perpetuate beautiful and good souls. And so a bookshelf, I think, is a kind of relatively decent microcosm of that big idea. So I'm not trying to preach this out into the world. I'm not saying that this is the solution that will solve racism. But if you are looking for what is the immediate steps I can do to ease the racial tensions I see around me, then what's worked for me and what has exposed me to beautiful souls has been to massively reduce the level to which I am concerned with race, and to massively increase the level to which I am concerned with beautiful and interesting and new ideas. If you go into a bookstore and your goal is to encounter a book that's going to say something you've never heard before, and really make an argument that's completely foreign to you, the chances of you picking up a book that's written by someone who's like you is astronomically reduced, you know. So and the same can be true with your friends. If you go into the world saying, I would like to talk with people who don't think like me, then the chances of you encountering people who are like you and curating them is also extremely reduced. You know, and as a result, you end up with really weird, interesting, and diverse friends in your life. And you know, it's useful for me to think of diversity like taking your temperature. Like if you don't have much diversity, if you don't have much racial interaction, let's say, in your bookshelf or in your social life or whatever, that's a sign that something's broken. It's a marker. But, you know, it's a marker in the exact same way that a high temperature is a marker. But if you have a high marker, the correct response, like if you have a high temperature, if you got a temperature of like 105 or something like that, the correct response is not to put yourself in a freezer. That'll probably just hurt you more. The correct response is to go to the source of the issue. And so, you know, don't go out thinking to yourself, oh man, like, you know, I'm so different from all the other races in the world. How can I punish myself, or how can I give to the other, or those questions? I don't think those are the right questions. I think the questions are is how do I cultivate as many beautiful souls as I possibly can? And of course, that isn't going to solve police brutality. That isn't going to solve systemic issues. That isn't going to, you know, fix the world. But, you know, Confucius says that before one can change the world, one must be able to rule over his nation. And before one can rule over his nation, he must rule over his family. And before he can rule over his family, he must rule over his self. And before he can rule over his self, he must rule over his mind. And before he can rule over his mind, he must be able to rule over his heart. And if a man can master his heart, he will be able to master his mind and master his family and master his nation and master the world. And that's how you make the world a better place. You start with your heart, and then you go to your head, and then you go to your family, and then you go to the world. So, you know, if you want to make the world a better place, if you want to make the world a better place, the simplest way to do that is to look upon yourself and figure out the correct way that you can be being a better person. And the correct way to do that is not to agonize over things you can't control. It's to agonize over what types of people you can give love to. I'm very glad that I have lived my life pursuing as desperately as I can people who don't think like me and people who challenge my worldview. And the natural consequence of that is that I am surrounded by people who don't look like me, don't talk like me, don't think like me. I am surrounded by people who are not white. I am surrounded by people who are not straight. I am surrounded by people who are not male. And that is a product of me not caring about race, gender, or sexual orientation. That came about as a product of me caring about people. And the natural derivative of that is the cultivation of beautiful diversity. Now, of course, this doesn't bring anyone back from the grave. And it doesn't alleviate pain, that is caused by injustice. But, we exist in a world in this moment in history that where some of us are literally trapped in our house and we can't see the people we love, and at the same time we look out into the world and we say, oh, well, I see authoritarian nations are getting stronger and stronger. And we look into our backyards and we see, oh, I don't think those elections went quite the way that I wanted them to. And you look across the country and you say, oh, that city is literally on fire because of a grave injustice done. And you begin to fall into the temptation of helplessness, that there's nothing you can do. And you think, if I can't save the world, why should I seek to master my own heart? And then you despair, and then you die. But this is the wrong response, I think. This is the wrong way to be. That just because the world feels so far out of your control doesn't mean that you can't make the world that you are immediately exposed to better. By simply being a more curious and interested person. Not by radically changing anything, just by simply desiring to interact with people who don't affirm what you already believe. This is the whole reason I started a YouTube channel. Was because I liked sparking conversation with people who didn't think like I did. When the world is hurting in a way that is so beyond your comprehension or ability to control, the best thing an individual can do is try and claim control over what they immediately have. And the way you activate upon that, in this instance, the way I can activate upon that in this instance, and maybe you can find some use out of it as well. The way we can activate upon that in this instance is to pursue the beautiful minds that aren't like our own minds, and pursue the beautiful cultures that aren't like our own cultures, and pursue the dynamic world that isn't like our own world. I think if we did that, the world would be a little bit better tomorrow than it was today. I think. I don't know. But it's worth executing upon. It's worth trying. So anyway, I am very tired, and I think I'm going to go to bed. If I end up posting this, thank you very much for listening. If I ended up deleting it, then hi, future editing Aric. Thanks for rewatching this. You are a beautiful human being. Try to change the world today. And as always, sincerely yours, Aric Wood.